So, hitting the ground running, what is a framework? Front-end frameworks are a powerful tool for developing complex user interfaces. They encourage you to build a maintainable, modular, standalone architecture that makes it easy to build your application and collaborate with other developers. Popular frameworks are backed by supportive communities, a wealth of documentation and tutorials, and offer battle-tested code that tackles common challenges that front ends pose as they scale. Frameworks allow you to tap into the most modern JavaScript features and offer tooling that makes it easy to prototype apps. Finally, they empower you with a shared language to discuss your architecture and challenges. Two of the most well-known and used front-end frameworks are React and Angular. We are here to help you decide on which framework is best suited for your project by exploring the strengths and trade-offs each one of these leading frameworks have to offer. So what is React? Building efficient web and mobile interfaces is often challenging and require the use of imperative logic. React enables you to declaratively describe user interfaces in terms of their state, and it will do the heavy lifting of natively building them for you. So, what is React? React is an open source front-end JavaScript library for building user interfaces or UI components. To better understand its origin, let's begin with a brief history of React. Facebook created React in 2011 for their own use on Facebook.com, one of the highest traffic websites in the world. React was then utilized by Instagram a year later in 2012. After already using React internally for 2 years, Facebook open sourced React in 2013. Some initially dismissed it because React ran contrary to popular practices by placing markup and logic together in a single file. But as more people experimented with the library, many embraced the new component-centric philosophy for separating concerns. Each React component is a separate concern. A year later, in 2014, React had grown significantly in popularity and was embraced by many notable companies outside of Facebook. This popularity led Facebook to open source React Native 2 in 2015. React Native is a related library that allows you to create native mobile applications for iOS and Android using React. In April of 2016, React reached another significant milestone by publishing version 15. This was a notable release because the previous version was 0.14. Moving to 15 finally put React's semantic versioning scheme in sync with traditional semantic versioning practices. And it also helped convey that React was now a mature and stable platform with over 5 years of active development and heavy production usage to back it up. Today, there are more than 50,000 React components in production at Facebook. Facebook is deeply committed to React since it also uses React on Instagram and React Native for mobile development. Today, Facebook employs a full-time React development staff that regularly releases bug fixes, enhancements, blog posts, and documentation. React is also a very lightweight framework with React DOM weighing only 35 kilobytes when gzipped and minified. No wonder the logo was chosen to be the scientific representation of an atom. So why use React? Perhaps the most compelling reason to choose React is once you learn it, you can build user interfaces for a huge variety of platforms and use cases. React is remarkably flexible. React embeds fewer opinions than its competition, so it's more flexible than opinionated frameworks like Angular and Ember. React is a library, not a framework. React's library approach has allowed it to evolve into a remarkably flexible tool. When React was initially created, it had a single focused use case. It was for creating components for web applications. However, as React has grown in popularity, its ecosystem has grown to cover a variety of use cases. You can generate static sites with React using popular tools like Gatsby and Phenomic. You can use React to build truly native mobile applications using React Native. And with great tools like Electron, you can even create installable desktop apps that run on Mac and Windows. React also supports server rendering out of the box, and popular frameworks like Next.js makes it really easy to set it up. In summary, learn React once, and you can write applications just about everywhere. And since React is used heavily by Facebook, you can trust that it will continue to run reliably in all popular browsers, including recent versions of Internet Explorer. Of course, Facebook can't afford to have its website only run on some browsers. Secondly, when React was first released, its performance was striking and helped set it apart from the competition. The React team recognized that JavaScript is fast, but it's the DOM that makes it feel slow. They realized that updating the DOM is expensive, so they found that updating the DOM in the most efficient way would help enhance performance. So behind the scenes, when you change data, React intelligently figures out the most efficient way to update the DOM. When React was created years ago, this was a novel design that gave React a notable performance advantage in many cases. See, before React, most libraries would unintelligently update the DOM to reflect the new state. This often led to redrawing a significant portion of the page, even when only a minor change had occurred. In contrast, React monitors the values of each component state. When a component state changes, React compares the existing DOM state to what the new DOM should look like. It then determines the least expensive way to update the DOM. This sounds complicated, but it's all handled automatically behind the scenes. And there are multiple benefits to this approach. It helps avoid layout thrashing, which is when a browser has to recalculate the position of everything when a DOM element changes. And being efficient is increasingly important in a world where many people are using mobile devices. Mobile devices vary widely in their CPU power, and conserving battery life is a concern as well. This also enables React simple programming model. When data changes, React efficiently updates the DOM automatically, and there's nothing extra that you have to do to enjoy this performance benefit. Lastly, with investment. Many well-respected corporations are deeply invested in React and its ecosystem today. React was created by Facebook, so of course React is heavily used on Facebook, one of the highest trafficked apps in the world, as well as Facebook's other properties, such as Instagram and WhatsApp. Facebook is deeply committed to React. Although React is an open source project, 4 of the top 6 committers to the React project are current full-time Facebook employees. And the Facebook development team maintains an active blog that consistently outlines the details of each release and plans for the future. Because of Facebook's deep existing commitment to React in production, when breaking changes occur in React, Facebook has consistently provided a code mod that automates the changes. Now, a code mod is a command line tool that you can point at your code base to automate changes. So with React Code Mod, you can automatically update all the React components to the latest specifications. Over the years, when breaking changes have occurred, the Facebook team has consistently published a code mod in order to automate updating to the latest version. This is a benefit of using React because it helps assure that significant breaking changes in the future are highly unlikely. Doing so would require Facebook to deal with painful breaking changes to tens of thousands of their own components. This helps assure the project's long-term stability. So not all the reasons to use React are pros. There's also a bunch of trade-offs. The first trade-off is a framework versus library. Competitors like Angular and Ember are frameworks. React, in contrast, is generally considered a library since it's lean and focused on components. Now, a framework isn't fundamentally better than a library, it's a trade-off. Here's a few advantages to choosing the framework approach. A framework contains more opinions, so you can avoid spending time trying to choose between many options. This reduces decision fatigue, and there are often less setup overhead. Frameworks can help enforce consistency since most frameworks are more opinionated. However, React's library approach also has some clear advantages. React is significantly smaller than most frameworks. This means that it's small enough that you can sprinkle it on existing applications so that you can slowly migrate an existing app to React. And React doesn't force many decisions on you. It allows you to only pull in the features that you need to keep your app lean and fast. You are free to pick the precise technologies that you need for your project, and you are free to select the best technology for your use case as well. Now, since React is a focused component library, more comprehensive frameworks like Angular come bundled with more features, including testing, a library for HTTP calls, routing, and internalization all built in. In contrast, with React, you select the pieces that apply to your use case and you add them in. Since React is very popular, there's almost certainly a mature library that does what you need. The second trade-off to consider is concise versus explicit. React trades conciseness for predictability and explicitness. You spend a little more time explicitly wiring things up together, but that helps them not fall apart. And it also helps people better understand what the code is doing. Here's a concrete example. Frameworks like Knockout and Angular popularized two-way binding as a way to avoid typing by automatically keeping form inputs in sync with the underlying data. This approach was extremely popular until React came along. It was popular because it requires less coding. With two-way binding, JavaScript values and inputs are automatically kept in sync. In contrast, React embraces one-way binding instead. It requires a little more code. With React, you declare an explicit change handler and you reference it on your input. This extra work has some benefits. You have more control because you can declare precisely what should happen on every event. This means you can transform and validate input before updating state and perform performance optimizations as desired. Your code is more explicit since you clearly state what you want to happen when an event occurs, and this makes it easy to understand and debug when an error happens. Although React helped repopularize doing one-way binding, other popular libraries like Angular have shifted gears and embraced it as well today for these reasons. Now, if your team strongly prefers two-way binding, you can use libraries that add it to React, but for the reasons I just mentioned, few do so, and I do not recommend it. In summary, here's the trade-off. React requires more typing to implement than traditional two-way binding approaches, but with the benefit of easier maintenance, greater clarity, reliability, and performance. The third and last trade-off is template-centric versus JavaScript-centric. There is a difference between the template-centric approach of traditional frameworks and React's JavaScript-centric approach. Angular, Vue, and Ember seek to make HTML more powerful by inventing their own unique syntax for writing code in HTML. React takes the exact opposite approach and instead utilizes the power of JavaScript to handle HTML. This fundamental difference is what makes React so elegant. So it's not just preferable because it's less code, it's preferable because the syntax is plain JavaScript. If you know JavaScript, then you know how to handle conditionals, looping, and events in React. This is why React's API is so small. Let's contrast the benefits of each approach. The benefit of the template approach is that it requires less JavaScript knowledge. Template languages provide a streamlined API for performing core functions. You focus on enhancing a template with framework-specific syntax. This makes templates more approachable for developers who are new to JavaScript. Of course, there's an obvious downside, which is that the template-centric approach leads to framework-specific syntax. To get good at the template-centric libraries like Angular and Vue, you must spend your time learning their specific syntax and rules for doing things that JavaScript can already handle. In contrast, React has very little unique syntax to learn. Most of what you write in React is really just plain JavaScript. This leads to less typing and less code, which I find produces a result that's easier to read and debug. Finally, React's JavaScript-centric approach encourages improving your JavaScript skills. And now Gerrit with Angular.
Okay, cool. So what exactly is Angular? Angular is a front-end framework developed by Google, and it was released in 2010, which makes it one of the oldest frameworks. Google also made the jump from JavaScript to TypeScript in the release of Angular 2. And when would Angular be used instead of React? Angular, like Ivan said, is more of a full-fledged solution. So Angular is used mostly for large-scale projects that involve a complex infrastructure. Okay, so Angular is supported by Google. So some of the pros, for Angular. Angular is supported by Google, which makes it dependable and trustworthy. And it's most likely to keep up with Google's occasional updates and announcements. Couple this with a wealth of detailed documentation, and you've got a reliable framework backed by a robust amount of information to answer any of your common queries. Angular provides a great selection of third-party integrations that can be added to the framework with ease. This gives developers more tools to improve the overall form and function of their project. Angular offers faster load times and increased security by using a brilliant concept, also known as the ahead of time compiler. What this means is Angular compiles HTML and TypeScript into JavaScript during the development, which means all of your code is compiled before the browser even loads your app. With Angular elements and modules, Angular is designed to be fully customizable, giving more power to developer and designer. Angular elements can also easily be added to projects that were built using other frameworks, which adds to the appeal of Angular. And finally, dependency injection is amazing. So the dependency injection capabilities of the Angular framework can be a huge advantage if you know how to use them, of how to use it. Creating various dependencies can be time consuming, but it is well worth using when you're working with a large scale project that is expected to perform a number of different functions. Now let's look at some cons of using Angular. If we look at Angular's cons, we see that one of the major drawbacks for using Angular is the platform's limited search engine optimization options and poor accessibility for search engine crawlers. However, being that Google is the #1 search engine on the planet, however, I can't imagine this problem will continue to persist for much longer without a solution being presented in another update soon. Another glaring issue using Angular is that it can be quite difficult to learn. With a complex web of modules, coding languages, integrations, and customizing capabilities, understanding Angular definitely takes some time. Fortunately, Angular provides a phenomenal support, and there are a number of online tutorials and courses you can take to catch up and start taking full advantage of all that Angular has to offer. So, unless you're working on a project of appropriate size and complexity, Angular can easily weigh you down. Save this one for a big ticket assignment and you'll fare just fine. Now, for the next part of the presentation, we'll be looking at surveys conducted by State of JS and Stack Overflow. Firstly, starting with State of JS, which had a survey conducted in 2020, which reached around about 24,000 people across 137 countries. So looking at the awareness, we can see that both Angular and React are very well-known frameworks, and the entire focus group was aware of both these frameworks. In this slide, however, we can see that while React's user base steadily increased from 2016 throughout to 2020, the same cannot be said for Angular. Angular had a steady growth until 2018. However, the growth started to stagnate in around 2020. Looking at the interest rate of each of the respective frameworks, we see that React is taking the crown here, with 58% of the focus group having interest in React in 2020, as to Angular, which only had a 21% interest rate. Also, while React's interest rate did go down, it wasn't nearly as bad as Angular's, which declined from 50% down to 21% in 2020. Now for satisfaction, with regards to satisfaction, this is where we can see a big difference. React is one of the most loved frameworks, having one of the highest satisfaction rates of all of the frameworks present, with a satisfaction rate of 80% throughout all of the years of surveying. Angular, on the other hand, started strong and steadily declined with a satisfaction rate from 68% in 2016 and finally hitting an all-time low in 2020 of 42%. So to give a little bit more insight on what people feel about the respective frameworks, we'll look at also Stack Overflow's survey conducted in February 2020 with around 65,000 developers. So first, again, we look at the interest rate of the respective frameworks. Here we can see React easily taking the crown with 22.4% of the focus group wanting to learn and use the framework. Angular, in contrast, only having 10.6% of the focus group wanting to learn the framework. Secondly, again, looking at the satisfaction rate, we can see that React is the vector with around 69% of the focus group loving to use the framework, whereas Angular is getting a bit less love with 54%, which is not bad, but it's not as great. Also, lastly, looking at how much the focus group did not like to use each of the respective frameworks, we see that Angular this time takes the crown with 46% of the focus group grading to use the framework, as to React, which had a smaller percentage in comparison of only 31.1%. Although we can't really just look at the feelings of developers now, can we? Yes, it is true that React is much more loved than its brother. Angular, while hated, is here to stay, and here's why. Angular is the most mature framework and has a much steeper learning curve and is more complex, but it is better for large projects and companies with large teams that have experience with TypeScript. It is a fully fledged solution used by large companies and large projects. Hence, Angular is here to stay. React, on the other hand, is a library for UI development and has a smaller learning curve, but it comes at the cost of having to learn additional libraries to turn it into a full-fledged solution like Angular, losing the advantage of having a smaller learning curve. Thus, in conclusion, the choice between the frameworks isn't that simple. You need to analyze your needs in order to choose the best framework for you. But a good idea would be to use React for smaller, less complex projects and Angular for the more involved, complex projects. We hope that our talk shed some light on these frameworks and would help you to choose what framework you will be using for your future projects. Thank you.